The man's shadow fell over the gurney, a blot of darkness in the harsh, buzzing fluorescent light of the ER. It was a place of ordered chaos, a symphony of beeps, hurried footsteps, and hushed, urgent voices that Sarah Jenkins had long ago learned to conduct. She could distinguish the rhythmic sigh of a ventilator from the frantic chirp of a crashing heart monitor, could filter the wail of a child with a broken bone from the guttural moan of a man in agony. For 10 years, the Metropolitan General ER had been her sanctuary of purpose, a place where she imposed calm on catastrophe. But this was different. This was a dissonance she had never heard before. The man, Danny Croft, wasn't a patient. He wasn't a panicked family member. He was a predator who had slipped past the flimsy veil of security. His eyes were wide and unnervingly slick, his movements jerky with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and malice. He loomed over the man on the gurney, the man Sarah had spent the last 20 minutes stabilizing. Captain Mark Rivera, United States Army. Even unconscious, with his face pale from blood loss and his body a roadmap of injuries from a vicious T-bone collision, he radiated a sense of stillness. His dog tags, which Sarah had gently cleaned and tucked back under his collar, were the only glint of silver in the sterile bay. "You need to tell them it was your fault," Danny hissed, his voice a low, gravelly thing that cut through the clinical hum. He leaned closer to Rivera's ear. "You swerved? You hear me? You tell the cops you swerved." Every protective instinct in Sarah's body ignited. The weariness from her 10-hour shift evaporated, replaced by a surge of ice-cold clarity. This wasn't a medical problem. It was an infection, and it had to be excised. She moved, placing her body squarely between the aggressor and her patient. Her voice was low, devoid of panic, forged in 1,000 other crises. "Sir, you can't be in here. Patient care area only." Danny's head snapped towards her. His gaze was venomous. "I'm not talking to you, lady. This is between me and him." He gestured with a twitching hand at the helpless soldier. He was the driver who had run the red light, the cause of all this pain. And he had come not with remorse, but with a demand to rewrite reality through intimidation. He lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was the desperate shove of a cornered animal. He tried to push past her, to get to Rivera. Sarah didn't flinch. She planted her feet, a 5'6" wall of scrubs and sheer will, and shoved him back harder. "Get out!" The command ripped from her throat, sharp and absolute. "Security!" The word was still in the air when the glint of metal appeared in his hand. It wasn't a large knife, just a cheap, 3-inch folding blade, but in the sterile confines of the ER, it looked as deadly as a sword. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. She saw the flash of the blade, felt the first, shocking impact. A sharp, searing pain exploded in her shoulder, hot and wet. It wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic gasp. There was only a surprised grunt, a disconnection between her brain and her body as the blade was ripped free. He stabbed again, wildly. Another puncture in her upper arm. She fought back, grabbing his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. But he was fueled by a manic frenzy. He twisted, and the blade bit deep into her side, just below her ribs, a sickening, internal kind of pain that stole her breath. He wrenched it out and plunged it in again, a few inches away. 4 times, the number registered with a strange, detached clarity. Through the red haze of pain, her only thought was of the man behind her. She did not fall, she did not give ground, she was a shield. The memory of her father, a Marine Sergeant Major, flashed in her mind, a man who spoke of standing your post as a sacred duty. This was her post. The curtains of the bay were ripped aside. A woman screamed. The ordered chaos of the ER shattered into pure pandemonium. 2 burly security guards, finally alerted, slammed into Danny, bearing him to the linoleum floor with a crash of plastic trays and metal instruments. Sarah stayed on her feet, swaying. Her hand went to her side, and when she pulled it back, it was slick with a shocking amount of blood. Her blood. She looked over her shoulder, her vision tunneling. Captain Rivera was untouched. Safe. The post was secure. Only then did she allow her legs to buckle. The symphony of the ER faded to a dull, distant roar. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the grime on the white floor tiles rushing up to meet her. Sarah awoke to silence. It was a profound, unnatural quiet that felt more jarring than the cacophony of the ER. A single, rhythmic beep beside her head was the only sound, a metronome counting out the seconds of her survival. The harsh fluorescence was gone, replaced by the soft gray light of a Saturday morning filtering through a large window. She was in a bed, tucked into crisp, sterile sheets. An IV line snaked into the back of her hand. Pain, a dull and comprehensive fire, radiated from her arm, her shoulder, her side. She tried to shift, and a sharp, breathtaking agony in her ribs made her gasp. A young nurse hurried to her side. "Easy, Sarah, just lie still." It was Maya, the new graduate she'd been mentoring. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of awe and terror. Sarah's own voice was a dry rasp. "The captain, Rivera, is he?" "He's okay," Maya said quickly, her voice thick with emotion. "Stable. They moved him to the ICU overnight. You saved his life, Sarah. Everyone's saying it." Sarah's head fell back against the pillow, a wave of relief so profound it almost made her nauseous. The doctor came in soon after, explaining the damage with clinical detachment. 4 stab wounds. The one in her shoulder was a clean puncture. The one in her arm had hit muscle. The 2 in her side were more serious. One had glanced off a rib, but the other had punctured her lung, requiring a chest tube and emergency surgery to repair. "You're lucky," the doctor concluded, a phrase that sounded utterly absurd. Later that morning, as she drifted in a morphine-laced haze, she received her first official visitor. Detective Frank Miller was a man who looked like he ran on stale coffee and disappointment. He sat heavily in the chair by her bed, pulling out a small, dog-eared notepad. He didn't offer condolences. He started with questions. "So, Miss Jenkins, let's go over this," he began, his tone flat, as if he were investigating a fender bender. The subject, Daniel Croft, entered the patient's bay. You confronted him verbally. "He was threatening my patient," Sarah clarified, her voice still weak. "Right." Miller scribbled a note. "And at what point did you initiate a call for security?" "It was instantaneous. He was already at the bedside. I yelled as soon as I realized what was happening." "But you made physical contact before security arrived," Miller stated, not as a question, but as an established fact. "You placed yourself between them. Did your hospital training instruct you to physically engage an unknown subject like that?" Sarah stared at him, a cold knot forming in her stomach that had nothing to do with her injuries. The implication was clear, hanging in the sterile air between them. "You escalated this. You went outside the lines." "My training," she said, her voice gaining a sharp edge, "is to protect my patients." There was no time to wait. Miller just made another note, his expression unchanging. "Uh-huh." He clicked his pen, stood up, and placed a business card on her bedside table. "We'll be in touch if we need anything else." He left her feeling violated in a way the knife hadn't managed. He hadn't seen a hero. He hadn't even seen a victim. He'd seen a complication, a messy variable in his report. The system, in its first official interaction with her, had already begun to file her away under problem. Her second visitor made the detective seem like a well-wisher. Mr. Alan Thompson, the hospital's director of risk management and legal affairs, arrived in the afternoon. He was a vision of corporate polish in a perfectly tailored suit, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and ambition. He carried a tablet computer like a shield and offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Sarah, a terrible, terrible ordeal," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "The entire hospital administration is very concerned." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she murmured, pulling her thin blanket higher. "I've had a preliminary chat with Detective Miller, and I've reviewed the initial incident reports," he continued, swiping a finger across his tablet. "And Sarah, I have to be frank. It seems there was a significant breach in protocol." Sarah blinked, the morphine fog receding in the face of a chilling premonition. "A breach? What are you talking about?" "I protected a patient." Thompson's smile didn't falter. "You engaged an assailant, turning what was a verbal confrontation into a physical one. Our policy, Section 4, subsection B, clearly dictates that staff should retreat to a safe distance and await security intervention. By physically intervening, you not only endangered yourself, for which we are, of course, terribly sorry, but you exposed the hospital to an immense and frankly catastrophic lawsuit. Croft's family could, and likely will, claim you were the aggressor, that you escalated the situation." The air in the room grew thin. Sarah felt a hot, disbelieving anger rise in her throat. "He had a knife. He was going to kill Captain Rivera." "We don't know that for certain," Thompson countered smoothly. What we do know is that your actions have created a liability nightmare. He slid the tablet onto her lap. To that end, pending a full internal investigation, we're placing you on paid administrative leave. He said it as if he were giving her a gift. For your own good, of course, he added. To give you time to heal, we've prepared a preliminary statement. If you could just sign it, it will help us control the narrative. She looked down at the screen. It was a sanitized, sterile version of events, stripped of all heroism and intent. It mentioned a sudden altercation and her unfortunate injuries. It omitted Danny's threats. It omitted Captain Rivera's status as a soldier. It was a document designed to protect the hospital, not her. "I'm not signing this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a fury that scared her. Thompson's plastic smile tightened at the edges. "I'd reconsider, Sarah. Your future career at this hospital, and perhaps elsewhere, could very well depend on your cooperation in this matter." He picked up his tablet and strode out, leaving the scent of his cologne and the poison of his threat hanging in the air. She was alone, punished for her courage, betrayed by the very institution she had bled for. The physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, hollow ache of that betrayal. Meanwhile, 2 floors down in the ER, Nurse Maya was finishing her own shift, her mind replaying the horror of the attack and the injustice of the rumors she was hearing from the administration wing. Consumed by a righteous anger she didn't know she possessed, she sat in the break room, pulled out her phone, and opened a popular nursing forum. Her fingers flew across the screen. "I don't know if this is against the rules, but I can't stay silent. Last night, one of the best nurses I know, a woman who lives to help people, was stabbed 4 times. Why? Because she stood between an attacker and a wounded soldier who couldn't defend himself. He was unconscious. She was his only shield. She saved his life. And now I'm hearing whispers that the hospital is trying to bury it, call it a protocol breach. Her name is Sarah Jenkins, and she's a hero. Don't let them forget that." She hesitated for a second, then copied the text and posted it to her private Facebook page, adding a single, potent detail. The soldier she saved is a captain in the U.S. Army. The post was a spark thrown into a digital tinderbox. It was shared by a friend whose brother was a Marine. He shared it to a military family group. From there, it exploded. The elemental story nurse stabbed 4X, defending soldier was too powerful, too pure to be contained. It bypassed traditional media, spreading through the military community with the speed of a battlefield command. The next morning, Sunday, Sarah was staring at a crack in the ceiling, feeling the full, crushing weight of her isolation. The detective saw a problem. Thompson saw a liability. The world, it seemed, had no place for what she had done. Maya slipped into the room, her eyes wide with a nervous energy that was different from before. "Sarah," she whispered, you have to see this." Confused, Sarah let Maya help her out of bed. Every movement was an agony, but she shuffled slowly to the large window overlooking the main entrance of Metropolitan General. She squinted in the bright morning sun, trying to understand what she was seeing. Below, a line was forming. It was silent, perfectly orderly, and radiated a power that made the hair on her arms stand up. It snaked from the hospital's glass doors, down the pristine concrete steps, and along the sidewalk. It was a line of men, dozens of them. Soon, 100. They were in civilian clothes jeans, worn hoodies, baseball caps, but there was nothing civilian about their bearing. They stood with their shoulders back, their chins up, their hands loosely at their sides. They didn't speak. They didn't hold signs. They simply stood, facing the hospital, a silent, disciplined phalanx. Sarah's breath hitched. She knew, with an instinct she'd inherited from her father, exactly who they were. They were Marines. Captain Rivera's unit, his brothers in arms, having heard the story that traveled through the night. They weren't there to protest. They weren't there to make a scene. They were there to stand post. They were forming a symbolic guard, a silent, unwavering testament to the woman who had guarded one of their own when he could not. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down Sarah's face. They weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of validation. For every dismissive detective, for every calculating administrator, here were 100 men whose entire culture was built on the very principle she was being punished for. You do not leave a comrade behind. You stand your ground. The system didn't know what to do with her, but the Marines did. And in their silent, formidable presence, the entire narrative of her lonely fight was about to change. The silent vigil of the Marines was a visual so potent, so profoundly American, that it was like a cinematic scene dropped into the middle of a mundane Sunday morning. It did not go unnoticed. Jessica O'Connell, a reporter for a local news affiliate, got the tip from a contact in the police department who'd mentioned an unusual gathering at Metro General. She expected a handful of protesters, maybe a small, vocal group. What she found was something else entirely. It was a story that didn't require words. Her cameraman, a veteran himself, understood immediately. He didn't focus on individual faces. He captured the power of the line, the sheer, disciplined weight of their presence set against the cold glass and steel of the hospital. Jessica's initial report was simple, broadcast live from the sidewalk. "We're here at Metropolitan General, where a truly remarkable scene is unfolding. Over 100 men, identified as United States Marines, have formed a silent line outside the hospital. We're told this is a show of support for a nurse, Sarah Jenkins, who was critically injured 2 nights ago while defending a wounded Army captain from an attacker right here in the ER." That was all it took. The story erupted. By noon, the local report was being aired on national cable news. The image of the silent, stoic line was irresistible. The hashtag #GuardTheGuardian, coined by a military spouse on Twitter, began to trend nationally. News vans with satellite dishes sprouting from their roofs descended on the hospital, clogging the streets and turning the area into a media encampment. Inside the administration wing, Alan Thompson was in full-blown crisis mode. His carefully constructed narrative of a protocol breach had been obliterated by a single, powerful image. The hospital's PR department, working in a frantic panic, issued a statement that was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. "Metropolitan General is incredibly proud of the bravery shown in our ER." It read, "We are conducting a full and thorough review to ensure the future safety of both our staff and patients. Nurse Jenkins is receiving the best possible care, and we ask that the media respect her privacy during this difficult time." It was a transparent, desperate attempt to reclaim control, but it was too late. The story was no longer theirs to manage. The counterattack came swiftly. Danny Croft's family, a well-off suburban clan accustomed to solving problems with money, hired a high-profile defense attorney named Marcus Thorne. Thorne, known for his aggressive media tactics, released a statement that dripped with feigned compassion. It painted Danny not as an assailant, but as a deeply troubled young man with a history of mental health challenges who was distraught and confused after the tragic accident. "Mr. Croft went to the hospital in a state of profound distress," the statement claimed. "According to our initial findings, he was aggressively confronted by hospital staff, which triggered a panicked reaction rooted in his diagnosed anxiety disorder. We believe the evidence will show this was not a malicious attack, but a tragic escalation for which multiple parties bear responsibility." The statement was a gut punch to Sarah. She watched Thorne deliver it on the television in her room, his face a mask of polished sincerity. They were trying to turn her into the aggressor, her act of defense into a provocation. It was a vile, calculated smear, and it sent a fresh wave of fury through her, burning away the last vestiges of morphine fog. That afternoon, there was a quiet knock on her door. Captain Mark Rivera, looking battered and pale but resolute, was wheeled into her room by a nurse. His arm was in a sling, his leg in a cast, but his eyes were clear and full of a profound, unwavering gratitude. "They told me what you did," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "They said you didn't hesitate." Sarah, overwhelmed, could only manage a humble shake of her head. "I was just doing my job." "No," Rivera corrected her gently. "That wasn't your job. Your job was to patch me up. You put your life on the line for me." For a stranger. He glanced towards the window, in the direction of the line of men who had long since been dispersed by police but whose presence still lingered in the air. "My guys outside. They know what that means. It's called standing your post. You don't abandon it, no matter what." He leaned forward slightly, his expression growing serious. "I saw the news. I heard what that lawyer is saying, and I know what Thompson and his cronies are trying to do. Don't let them. Don't let them twist this into something it wasn't." He held her gaze, his own integrity a tangible force. "He threatened me, Sarah. At the scene of the accident and in that room. He was going to hurt me. You didn't escalate anything, you ended it. You tell the truth, the whole truth. I was a witness, and we have your back." His words were a reinforcement. A steel rod slipped into her spine. The validation from the man she had saved was the final piece of armor she needed. The fear was still there, but now it was outweighed by a powerful, clarifying resolve. That evening, she called her older brother, a retired Navy commander. After listening to the entire story, his voice tight with controlled anger, he gave her a number. His name is Ben Carter. He was a prosecutor, a damn good one. Now he takes on guys like that Thompson prick for a living. Call him. Tonight. Ben Carter met Sarah in her hospital room the next day. He wasn't like the slick attorneys on TV. He was in his 40s, with a slightly rumpled suit and eyes that were both kind and incredibly sharp. He didn't bring a briefcase. He brought a legal pad and a coffee, and he just listened. He had her start from the beginning, from her father's service to the details of the attack, Miller's dismissive questions, and Thompson's chilling threats. He listened for over an hour without interruption. When she was finished, he finally spoke, his voice calm and analytical. "Okay, they're running two classic plays here," he said, tapping his pen on the pad. "The defense is the crazy but harmless defense, trying to muddy the waters and smear the victim. Standard scumbag move. The hospital is the CYA cover your ass play. They have a protocol that failed, a security lapse that allowed Croft in, and now they're trying to make you the scapegoat to avoid a massive negligence lawsuit. Your heroism inconveniently exposed their incompetence." He looked at her, his expression serious. "So we fight on both fronts. First, we stop letting them tell your story. We get your truth out there, raw and unfiltered. Second, we go on the offense. We're not just defending you, we're going after the hospital. Their negligence put you and Captain Rivera in that room with that man. They don't get to blame you for the fire when they left the gas can next to the stove." He leaned forward. "I'll take this on. No fee unless we win. What do you say?" For the first time since she woke up in this room, Sarah felt a surge of real hope. She had an ally, a weapon. "What do we do first?" she asked. The next afternoon, in a rented conference room at a hotel across the street from the hospital, Sarah Jenkins faced a wall of cameras. Ben Carter stood beside her, a quiet, solid presence. Sarah, out of the hospital but with her arm still in a sling and bandages visible beneath her blouse, looked small and fragile behind the podium. But when she spoke, her voice, though shaking slightly, was clear and strong. She recounted the events of that night simply, factually, without melodrama. She detailed Danny Croft's words, his aggression, her certainty that he intended to harm her patient. Then, she turned her attention to the hospital. "I was stabbed 4 times while protecting a man who couldn't protect himself," she said, her eyes finding the lens of the lead network camera. "And for that act, the hospital I have dedicated the last decade of my life to has put me under investigation, threatened my career, and tried to silence me. They told me I breached protocol." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Being a nurse, being any first responder, isn't about following a flowchart when a life is on the line. It's about a covenant. It's about protecting your patients. I did my job. The real question this community should be asking is, did Metropolitan General Hospital do theirs? Her statement was a bombshell. It was powerful, dignified, and devastatingly effective. It cut through the corporate spin and the legal maneuvering, reframing the narrative around 2 simple concepts: her heroism and the hospital's failure. The storm had broken, and Sarah Jenkins was no longer just weathering it. She was directing the lightning. Sarah's press conference changed the atmospheric pressure of the entire situation. Public opinion, already on her side, solidified into a concrete wall of support. The DA's office, which had been proceeding with a standard assault case, was now under immense scrutiny. The mayor's office issued a statement praising Sarah's heroic intervention. The tidal wave of public opinion was crashing against the walls of the institutions that had tried to silence her. The first cracks appeared within the police department. Detective Miller's perfunctory investigation was sharply criticized by his superiors. Under pressure, he was forced to re-interview the ER staff. This time, he listened. The nurses and orderlies, emboldened by Sarah's public stand, gave full, vivid accounts. They described Danny Croft's agitated state when he first entered the ER, his clear aggression, and the hospital's notoriously lax security, especially during busy shifts. Several mentioned a blind spot in the security camera coverage near the bay where Sarah and Rivera had been. This was the opening Ben Carter needed. He immediately filed a broad discovery motion against Metropolitan General, demanding all internal communications, incident reports, and security assessments related to the ER for the past 2 years. The hospital's lawyers fought back, but the judge, sensing the direction of the public wind, granted the motion. The documents were a goldmine. Ben's team unearthed a chain of emails between the head of nursing and Alan Thompson. The emails showed repeated requests for increased security patrols and the installation of metal detectors at the ER entrance, citing a rise in violent incidents. Thompson had denied every request, citing prohibitive costs and negative patient optics. Then they found the smoking gun, a formal complaint filed by Sarah Jenkins herself 6 months prior, detailing a specific incident where a belligerent patient's family member had threatened staff in the exact same camera blind spot. Her report concluded, "This is a serious security vulnerability that puts both staff and patients at unacceptable risk." Thompson had replied with a one-line email. Noted, "We will take it under advisement during the next budget cycle." He had known. He had done nothing. His attempt to blame Sarah wasn't just a CYA maneuver, it was a cover-up of his own lethal negligence. The legal battle escalated. Before Danny Croft's criminal trial, Sarah had to endure a deposition from his defense attorney, Marcus Thorne. They sat across from each other in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room. Thorne was all smug condescension and verbal traps. "So, Nurse Jenkins," Thorne began, leaning back in his leather chair, "your late father was a Marine, a sergeant major, I believe? A tough man." "He was a good man," Sarah corrected. "Of course. Would you say growing up in that environment gave you shall we say, a predisposition to seeing things in terms of conflict? A tendency to meet aggression with aggression?" Ben Carter interjected immediately. "Objection. Counsel is psychoanalyzing my client." But Sarah answered before the stenographer could even note the objection. "I'd say it gave me a predisposition to recognizing when someone is in danger and a duty to do something about it." Thorne smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "And you, a civilian with no law enforcement training, made the decision to use physical force against my client, a man who, as we now know, has documented mental health challenges." "I am a trained medical professional," Sarah said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "And on that night, I didn't see a man with a diagnosis on a chart. I saw a man with a knife in his hand moving toward a helpless patient on a gurney. I would do it again, today, tomorrow, for any patient in my care." She was immovable. For 4 hours, Thorne tried to twist her words, question her motives, and paint her as a hot-headed vigilante, but her story never wavered. It was anchored in the simple, unshakable truth of her actions. She left the deposition exhausted but intact. Thorne left, knowing his strategy of smearing the victim was doomed. The criminal trial of the state versus Daniel Croft began in early fall. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, nurses in their off hours, and a rotating contingent of quiet, imposing Marines in civilian clothes who sat in the back rows. The prosecution's case was methodical. They established the facts of the accident, Croft's culpability, and the attack. But the real fireworks began when they called their key witnesses. Alan Thompson was first. On the stand, under a blistering cross-examination from the assistant district attorney who had been furnished with the evidence by Ben Carter, his corporate polish melted away. The emails were projected on a large screen for the jury to see. His repeated denials of security requests, his dismissive response to Sarah's own warning it, painted a damning picture of a man who valued dollars over lives. He squirmed, he obfuscated, but the evidence was irrefutable. He walked off the stand a broken, humiliated man, his career in ruins. Then Captain Mark Rivera took the stand. He wore his full army dress uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons. He walked with a slight limp, the only remaining outward sign of his injuries. In a quiet, authoritative voice that commanded the absolute attention of the room, he recounted the events of that night. He described his own fear and helplessness, and then he described Sarah. "I have been in situations where my life was in danger," he said, his eyes on the jury. "I know what courage looks like. It doesn't always carry a rifle. Sometimes it wears scrubs. The woman sitting right there," he said, nodding to Sarah, "acted with a selflessness and bravery that I have seen on the battlefield. In the Army, we award medals for valor for acts like the one Nurse Jenkins performed. In civilian life, it seems she got an investigation and a threat to her career." The courtroom was silent, the power of his testimony hanging in the air. Finally, Sarah took the stand. She walked the jury through the night, her voice steady. When the prosecutor was done, Marcus Thorne rose for the cross-examination, but his earlier arrogance was gone. He was facing not just a nurse, but a national hero backed by a decorated soldier and a mountain of public sympathy. His questions were half-hearted, his attempts to poke holes in her story feeble. For his final question, he asked, "And you maintain you had no other choice but to physically intervene?" Sarah looked past him, her gaze landing on Daniel Croft, who refused to meet her eyes. Her voice was clear, ringing with the moral certainty she had earned in blood and betrayal. "He made a choice to hurt someone," she said. "I made a choice to stop him. That was the only choice that mattered." The jury deliberated for 57 minutes. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with tears in her eyes, stood and faced Daniel Croft. "On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we the jury find the defendant." She paused, taking a breath. "Guilty." A wave of relief washed through the courtroom. Sarah closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or even joy. It was a tear of catharsis. The system, which had so profoundly failed her at first, had finally, painstakingly, been forced to acknowledge the truth. The guilty verdict was a public vindication, but the war wasn't over. The second front, the civil suit against Metropolitan General Hospital, was still looming. However, the outcome of the criminal trial had left the hospital catastrophically exposed. With Alan Thompson's negligence laid bare in open court and their former star nurse, now a beloved national figure, their legal position had crumbled. The hospital's board, in a desperate act of damage control, summarily fired Thompson. Within a week, their high-priced lawyers contacted Ben Carter with a settlement offer. It was substantial, but Ben, sensing their desperation, pushed back. The final settlement was staggering. It included a multi-million-dollar payment to Sarah for her injuries, lost wages, and emotional distress. But Ben had insisted on non-monetary terms as well. The hospital was forced to issue a formal public apology to Sarah, acknowledging her heroism and their own systemic failures. Most importantly, they had to agree to fund and implement a sweeping set of new security measures for the ER, including a 24/7-man security station, weapon screening at the entrance, and full camera coverage. The staff, in a quiet act of rebellion and respect, had already nicknamed the new plan the Jenkins Protocol. Sarah sat in the living room of her modest house, the settlement papers spread across her coffee table. The numbers were abstract, life-changing in a way she couldn't yet comprehend. She had financial security for the rest of her life. She had won. But the thought of returning to the ER at Metro General, or any ER, filled her with a profound sense of dread. The place that had once been her sanctuary was now a source of trauma. The trust had been broken too deeply. What was she supposed to do now? Her gaze fell on a framed photograph on the mantel. It was her father, 20 years younger, standing proud in his Marine Corps dress blues. She thought of his steadfast principle of standing your post. She thought of the line of Marines outside her window, a silent promise of solidarity. She thought of Captain Rivera's quiet words of encouragement. And she thought of the emails and letters that had poured in by the thousands messages from other nurses, paramedics, and doctors across the country, each sharing their own harrowing story of workplace violence, of being threatened or assaulted, of being ignored or blamed by their administrators. Her fight, she realized, hadn't been just about her. It was about all of them. The settlement wasn't an ending, it was ammunition. Her ordeal hadn't just given her scars and a bank account, it had given her a voice. She picked up her phone and called Ben Carter. "I want to start a foundation," she said, the idea taking shape even as she spoke the words. "I want to use this money to help people like me. People who get punished for doing the right thing." 1 year to the day after the attack, a different kind of gathering took place. It wasn't a silent line of vigil, but a celebratory launch. A montage of Sarah's new life began. First, she stood at a podium, cutting a blue ribbon for the official opening of the Protectors Shield Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to advocating for safer working conditions for healthcare professionals and providing legal aid to whistleblowers and victims of workplace violence. Next, she was seen testifying before a state legislative committee, her voice confident and clear. She used her own story not for sympathy, but as evidence, pushing for a new bill that would make assaulting a healthcare worker a felony, equivalent to assaulting a police officer. Finally, she was at a national nursing conference in Chicago. The auditorium was packed with thousands of her peers. When she was introduced, the entire room rose to its feet in a thunderous, sustained standing ovation. She was no longer just Nurse Jenkins who got stabbed. She was Sarah Jenkins, a leader, an advocate, a symbol of resilience. She had taken the worst night of her life and forged it into a national movement. The first annual gala for the Protector Shield Foundation was held in a grand ballroom downtown. The event was a testament to how far she had come. The room was filled with donors, politicians, grateful nurses, and doctors who had been helped by the foundation's work. Ben Carter was there, beaming like a proud father. Jessica O'Connell was covering the event, her reporting having earned her a promotion. And at the head table, sitting next to Sarah, was Captain Mark Rivera, fully recovered and serving as the Foundation's military liaison. When Sarah stepped to the podium, a hush fell over the room. She looked out at the sea of faces, her expression serene and powerful. A year and a half ago, in the middle of a chaotic night in the ER, I faced one man with a knife, she began, her voice steady and clear. But in the days that followed, I faced a different, more insidious kind of threat. It was the threat of indifference, the threat of bureaucracy, the threat of a system that too often protects itself instead of its people. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. The line of Marines that formed outside my hospital window that Sunday morning did more than just get the media's attention. They showed me I wasn't alone. They reminded me that some principles are absolute. They taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up and stand your ground. Now, she continued, a smile touching her lips, we are building a new line. It's a line of support, a line of advocacy, a line of legal and political change. It's a line to guard all the guardians, the nurses, the medics, the doctors who stand on the front lines of our health and our safety every single day in every city and every town. Our mission is to make sure that when they stand their post, someone is standing behind them. She finished her speech to another wave of applause. As she stepped down, Captain Rivera met her at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into a warm, respectful embrace. The camera pulled back, showing the two of them, the soldier and his guardian, standing together in the center of the room. They were surrounded not by the chaos of an emergency room, but by a vibrant community born from that chaos. The single, senseless act of violence had been answered, not with fear, but with a legacy of courage. The line of defense Sarah Jenkins had built was no longer just her own body shielding a single patient. It was a nationwide shield, protecting thousands. And it was just getting started.